Hollywood loves its legends, but behind the diamonds, the red carpets, and the perfect photographs, there were marriages so volatile, so chaotic, and so emotionally destructive that the studios spent millions trying to bury the truth. These aren't rumors. These are the real stories of the icons we worship and the private hells they survived.
Celebrating Hollywood royalty, North Carolina native Ava Gardner, the iconic actress, would have turned 100 this year, and the museum in Smithfield named after her has some big plans.
Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner, the marriage that was too big for Hollywood. Frank Sinatra was already a phenomenon, blue eyes, swagger, voice like velvet. But by the late 1940s, his career faltered. The hysteria around him faded, roles dried up, and the gossip pages whispered that the once unstoppable star was losing his shine. Enter Ava Gardner. She was the definition of danger wrapped in beauty, magnetic, fearless, and impossibly alive. Hollywood treated her like a miracle that refused to sit still. Men chased her, studios admired her, and tabloids studied her like a rare animal. And Frank fell for her with a force he couldn't control. When they got together, Hollywood shook. Not because it was scandalous, but because they were combustive. Their connection was lightning, brilliant, loud, and impossible to contain. When Ava entered a room, Frank followed. When Frank's moods darkened, Ava felt the storm before it hit. They loved each other intensely, and they wounded each other just as intensely. Fights erupted, fueled by jealousy, pressure, and the impossible expectations placed on two of the most famous people alive. Voices were raised, doors were slammed, accusations thrown from one side of a mansion to another. They weren't cruel people, just two emotional powerhouses trapped in a spotlight that magnified every flaw. When Frank's career sank lower, Ava's only rose. He struggled with insecurity, she struggled with being misunderstood, and every argument chipped away at what could have been a legendary love story. Frank eventually rebuilt his career spectacularly, but the marriage, bruised by mistrust and public embarrassment, couldn't withstand the turmoil. They divorced, but they never fully detached. Letters continued for years. The love never really ended, only the ability to live with each other did. Ava once said, "We were fighting all the time, Frank and I, fighting and loving." And that's exactly what their story was, a great love that couldn't survive its own fire. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller, beauty meets intellectual brutality. Marilyn Monroe was more than a symbol. She was a woman searching for understanding, depth, and respect. Behind the platinum hair and dazzling smile was a complex, intelligent individual who longed to be seen for who she truly was. Her brilliance extended beyond her beauty. She had a sharp mind, a natural curiosity, and a deep desire to grow as an artist. But Hollywood, ever obsessed with surface and spectacle, refused to see her as anything other than a blonde bombshell. Every role, every interview, every public appearance reinforced a version of her that wasn't the full truth. She was constantly negotiating the gap between who the world wanted her to be and who she actually was inside. When Marilyn met playwright Arthur Miller, she believed she had found someone who could bridge that gap. Here was a man who valued intelligence, artistry, and depth. He admired her mind as much as her presence, and for a while, it seemed like the beginning of something real. Their marriage started with hope, with plans to collaborate creatively and emotionally. Marilyn sought roles that challenged her and demonstrated her range. Miller, inspired by her complexity, worked on scripts that could bring her talents to life in new ways. It was a union that promised mutual respect, shared ambition, and a deep connection. Yet the pressures of fame and personal vulnerabilities gradually tightened around them. Marilyn's anxiety, which had long shadowed her life, grew heavier under the glare of Hollywood's unrelenting spotlight. She feared disappointing those around her, feared failing in her work, feared that no one would ever truly see her. Miller, while supportive, was burdened by his own career and personal expectations. The emotional demands placed upon him by Marilyn's struggles sometimes left him feeling helpless and unsure of how to respond. What had started as connection slowly became tension, as neither could fully bridge the distance created by fear, stress, and public scrutiny. Their private life was often a battlefield of miscommunication. Long silences replaced conversations, misunderstandings replaced clarity, and nights ended with each retreating into their own separate worlds. Even in the intimacy of home, they were sometimes strangers. Criticism from Hollywood only intensified the strain. Every strong performance by Marilyn was dissected. Every perceived mistake was magnified in the press. The world refused to acknowledge her growth or talent, treating her instead as an icon whose value was measured in looks and gossip. Miller, too, felt the weight. He documented his frustrations and disappointments in his writing, inadvertently turning private struggles into creative material that Marilyn sometimes discovered. Hurt, betrayal, and misunderstanding lingered between them. They weren't cruel to each other. They were two people attempting to be enough, to support and love each other, yet stumbling under pressures far beyond the control of either. Fame, expectations, emotional fragility, and public scrutiny conspired to erode the foundation of their relationship. Ultimately, their marriage became a quiet tragedy. It wasn't marked by explosive cruelty or dramatic scandal. It was marked by exhaustion, unmet needs, and the slow, painful realization that love alone could not overcome the weight of the world pressing on them both. Marilyn and Arthur Miller's story is a testament to the human cost of fame, the fragility of connection under relentless pressure, and the heartbreak that comes when two people genuinely care for each other but find themselves unable to survive the impossible expectations placed upon them. In the end, their story is not a cautionary tale of failure. It is a portrait of two extraordinary individuals, each brilliant in their own right, navigating love and life under the relentless glare of the public eye. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli, Genius, Fear, and the Price of Stardom. Judy Garland was a rare kind of performer, the sort whose talent didn't just entertain, but reached straight into the soul. She carried an emotional honesty that made every song feel like a confession, every performance a window into her heart. But behind the brilliance was someone Hollywood tried to mold into an impossible ideal. From the moment she entered the studio system, executives dictated nearly every detail of her life. They controlled her work schedule, her diet, her sleep patterns, and even the way she smiled on camera. Judy wasn't treated like a young woman figuring out her place in the world. She was treated like a product that needed constant polishing. By the time she married director Vincente Minnelli, she had already endured years of pressure and manipulation. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, and carried a level of anxiety that most people never saw. To the public, she sparkled. But privately, she often felt overwhelmed and unsure of herself. Minnelli, however, saw her through a different lens. He admired her deeply, both as an artist and a partner. Their collaboration on Meet Me in St. Louis was a turning point for Judy's career, helping revive her status as one of Hollywood's most captivating stars. For a brief moment, their marriage gave her a sense of stability she had long been denied. But stability in Hollywood rarely lasts. As Judy's emotional struggles grew more intense, the atmosphere at home became unpredictable. The combination of long filming schedules, constant public expectations, and her own insecurities slowly eroded the foundation of their relationship. Minnelli, unsure of how to help and overwhelmed by his responsibilities, began retreating into his work. Judy, feeling abandoned and misunderstood, spiraled into deeper fatigue and confusion. There was no dramatic showdown, no explosive finale. Their breakup was marked by quiet sadness, a gentle unraveling between two people who cared for each other but could no longer carry the weight of a world that demanded too much. In the end, their story wasn't about failure. It was about the emotional toll fame takes on even the brightest hearts. Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh. A tragic love between two greats. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were not just actors, they were cultural royalty. Audiences were mesmerized by them, both individually and together. They carried a kind of brilliance that felt almost unreal, the kind of charm and talent that made people believe in magic. Their chemistry was undeniable, whether on stage in the world of Shakespeare or at glamorous events where they instantly became the center of attention. Their love story seemed larger than life, intoxicating in its intensity, and impossible for the world to look away from. But behind the curtain, Vivien Leigh faced emotional struggles that few people truly understood. At a time when mental health was deeply misunderstood, she experienced severe mood swings, long periods of restlessness, and overwhelming waves of anxiety that left her exhausted and confused. These moments didn't just affect her career, they shaped every corner of her personal life. Laurence Olivier, devoted to her and desperate to help, tried to navigate the changing emotional landscape, but he soon realized he was in territory far beyond his understanding. His early attempts to support her were full of love and determination, but over time, exhaustion and helplessness began to overshadow his efforts. Their marriage became a mix of breathtaking affection and heartbreaking instability. When things were good, they were incredible. Performances that left audiences stunned, moments of deep connection that reminded them why they fell in love in the first place. But when Vivian's emotional struggles intensified, everything around them grew tense. Rehearsals became difficult. Public appearances turned stressful. Friends and colleagues quietly worried as the couple tried to hold themselves together in the middle of growing chaos. Olivier wasn't without flaws. As the emotional pressure mounted, he grew distant, impatient, and often frustrated with himself for not knowing how to help. Vivian, on the other hand, faced inner battles that medical science at the time couldn't correctly diagnose or treat. She wasn't to blame. She was a woman carrying a heavy burden with little guidance or understanding from the world around her. Their love story remains one of Hollywood and theater's most unforgettable. But its ending wasn't marked by scandal or betrayal. It was marked by quiet heartbreak. Two extraordinary people deeply in love, slowly pulled apart by an emotional storm neither of them knew how to weather. Their love was epic, their pain private and devastating. Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey, a marriage that was never ready to begin. Charlie Chaplin, the towering figure of silent cinemas, carried a personal life far more turbulent than the whimsical characters he played on screen. Long before he met Lita Grey, Chaplin was already navigating complicated relationships, enormous public expectations, and the pressure of maintaining his status as one of the most recognized artists in the world. When Lita entered his orbit, she was still very young, swept up in the glow of his fame, unsure of how to balance admiration with the realities of becoming involved with someone so powerful and visible. Their relationship did not grow naturally or slowly. It was rushed, overshadowed by pressure, and ultimately shaped by a fear of public scandal rather than genuine readiness for marriage. Inside their home, the dynamic quickly became strained. Arguments erupted not because either of them was malicious, but because neither had the emotional tools to navigate the chaos surrounding them. Chaplin, already burdened by demanding film productions, legal battles, and constant public scrutiny, often reacted with harshness and frustration. He was a man stretched too thin, trying to control a life that felt increasingly unmanageable. Lita, on the other hand, was inexperienced, anxious, and suddenly carrying responsibilities she was never prepared for. She felt overwhelmed, isolated, and trapped inside a world she didn't fully understand. What should have been a partnership became a cycle of misunderstandings and emotional tension. By the time their marriage began to fall apart, the public was already watching. Their divorce exploded into one of the earliest major Hollywood scandals. Newspapers published dramatic headlines, exaggerated stories, and invasive details, turning private heartbreak into national entertainment. Both Chaplin and Lita were hurt by the spectacle. They weren't villains. They were two incompatible people caught in a storm far larger than themselves, left emotionally bruised not only by each other, but by the merciless spotlight of fame. Their story stands as a reminder that even the most gifted artists are still human. Talent can mesmerize millions, but it can't shield a person from emotional turmoil, youthful mistakes, or the weight of a public that demands more than anyone can realistically give. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini, a romance that shattered her image. Ingrid Bergman's relationship with Italian director Roberto Rossellini began with something far more human than the scandal the world later turned it into. Before the headlines, before the public outrage, it was simply two artists recognizing something powerful in each other. Ingrid admired Rossellini's bold, unconventional filmmaking. He admired her ability to bring truth and vulnerability to the screen in a way few actors ever could. Their connection wasn't reckless. It was rooted in creativity, ambition, and a mutual desire to break free from the limitations placed on them by the industry. For Ingrid, Hollywood had begun to feel restrictive. She was adored, yes, but she was also boxed in. offered roles that fit the image the studios crafted for her, rather than the depth she craved. Rossellini represented artistic freedom, a daring escape from the polished world she had mastered. To him, Ingrid was more than a glamorous star. She was an artist with a mind, a will, and a hunger for authenticity. Their bond grew naturally from conversations about film, about life, about courage. To Ingrid, following him to Italy felt like choosing truth over expectations. But after the romantic idealism faded, reality showed its harsher edges. Rossellini, brilliant but intense, struggled with the idea of sharing her with Hollywood. He discouraged her from accepting roles that would take her away from him or reattach her to the American studio system. What began as love slowly turned into a quiet tug-of-war over her career. He became increasingly possessive of her professional choices, hoping she would devote herself entirely to the world they were building together. Ingrid, who had always balanced independence with warmth, began to feel the walls closing in. She missed the creative freedom that had once defined her. She missed the industry she had helped transform. She missed being seen, not just as someone's partner, but as an artist in her own right. The distance between them grew, not through cruelty, but through fundamentally different visions of life and work. Rossellini couldn't accept her need for autonomy. Ingrid couldn't silence the part of herself that needed expression and growth. In the end, their marriage didn't collapse with shouting or betrayal. It faded gently, painfully, as two remarkable people realized they were trying to merge paths that were never meant to become one. Their love was real, but love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gap between two worlds, pulling them in opposite directions. Joan Crawford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., glamour versus insecurity. Joan Crawford's rise from humble beginnings to Hollywood royalty was nothing short of extraordinary. Every role she won, every red carpet appearance, and every accolade she earned came at the cost of relentless effort, tireless ambition, and an unwavering drive to succeed. She had fought tooth and nail to leave poverty behind and carve a place for herself among the stars, and nothing about her journey was easy. Douglas Fairbanks Jr., born into the glittering world of Hollywood royalty and privilege, was someone whose life seemed preordained, a life Joan had long dreamed of accessing but knew she had to earn. Their union brought two very different worlds together, a world of hard-won ambition and a world of inherited opportunity. On the surface, their marriage sparkled with glamour, red carpets, and magazine spreads that suggested perfection. But behind closed doors, it was far more complicated. Joan's intensity, born from years of struggle, collided with Douglas's upbringing, steeped in privilege and expectation. Small disagreements over career choices, social circles, or even the way they expressed affection often escalated into larger conflicts. Douglas sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer force of Joan's emotional energy, while Joan felt misunderstood and dismissed by a world that had never truly tested him in the way she had been tested all her life. Their love was real, but it existed alongside tension, miscommunication, and unspoken frustrations that neither could fully bridge. Ultimately, the marriage ended not in scandal, but in quiet recognition of incompatibility. Their parting marked a turning point in Joan's life, the end of her youthful idealism in love, and the beginning of the carefully constructed, fiercely determined persona that would define her Hollywood career for decades. In the crucible of this marriage, she learned lessons about power, resilience, and self-preservation that would serve her in the relentless, demanding world of Tinseltown. What remained was a profound respect for each other's achievements and an acknowledgement that love, as passionate as it might be, sometimes isn't enough to align two very different hearts. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, passion that consumed itself. No couple in Hollywood history burned brighter or hotter than Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. From the moment their paths collided on a movie set, their chemistry was electric, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. Every glance, every touch seemed charged with intensity, and the world watched in awe as two of cinema's most captivating figures collided both on and off the screen. Their love was undeniable, their passion legendary, and their arguments just as famous. Friends, colleagues, and the public alike were captivated by a relationship that seemed to exist in constant motion, swinging between dizzying heights and perilous lows. Together, Elizabeth and Richard dominated the silver screen, conquering box offices with films like Cleopatra and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Their personal lives, meanwhile, dominated gossip columns, with tabloids chronicling every glamorous outing, every fight, and every public declaration of love. But behind the headlines, their relationship was combustible, a constant storm of affection and tension. Their tempers clashed with the force of a hurricane. Their egos, both vast and unyielding, collided again and again. Their extravagant lifestyle, luxurious homes, yachts, and parties only intensified the pressure, magnifying every quarrel and every small grievance into a larger conflict. Yet, for all the chaos, their love was real. They loved loudly and deeply in ways most people could never understand. Their fights were fierce, their reconciliations passionate, and the cycle seemed unending. Twice they married, twice they divorced, and through it all, neither could fully sever the bond that tethered them together. It was a connection forged by intensity, desire, and the shared experience of being larger-than-life personalities trying to coexist in a world that demanded both perfection and spectacle. Their story wasn't a failure. It was too immense, too extraordinary for ordinary life. It was a love story that defied logic, endured scandal, and left an indelible mark on Hollywood history. In the end, Elizabeth and Richard were bound by something neither could control, a love so intense it consumed them, yet somehow also defined them. Humphrey Bogart and Mayo Method, a relationship made of friction. Before Lauren Bacall entered his world, Humphrey Bogart was married to actress Mayo Method, a woman known for her fiery personality, quick wit, and unpredictable moods. Their relationship was intense from the start, a collision of two strong-willed people trying to navigate love under the relentless glare of Hollywood. Arguments flared frequently, sometimes lasting hours, and their spats occasionally spilled into public view, making headlines and drawing the scrutiny of fans and journalists alike. Behind closed doors, the household was a turbulent mix of tension, brief reconciliations, and emotional exhaustion. Bogart found himself caught between the pressures of a demanding career and the challenges of a volatile marriage. Method, meanwhile, grappled with insecurities and fears of being overshadowed, threatened by her husband's rising fame and the attention that came with it. Their disagreements weren't rooted in malice, but in the clash of two wounded, passionate individuals struggling to balance ambition, love, and personal insecurity. Each conflict carried the weight of fear, frustration, and unmet emotional needs. Over time, the strain became unbearable, remembered more for scandal than skill. Yet beneath the sensationalism, Barbara deserved empathy. She faced challenges few could understand, balancing personal struggles with the unrelenting gaze of fame. Hollywood's treatment of her was ruthless, turning her pain into entertainment and erasing the complexity of her humanity. In remembering Barbara Payton, it's important to see her not just as a cautionary figure, but as a woman whose brilliance, vulnerability, and resilience were eclipsed by forces beyond her control, an emblem of the high cost of fame and the human side of Hollywood's golden age. These 12 stories aren't about villains and victims. They are about pressure, fame, insecurity, mental health struggles, fear of abandonment, power imbalances, careers that demanded too much love that burned too brightly. Hollywood didn't just create stars. Sometimes it consumed them. And the real tragedy? Most of them were simply trying to be loved, understood, and seen beyond the persona the world demanded.